Hello and welcome to another episode of Veterans to Success, the podcast where I get to speak with and interview seemingly ordinary people with extraordinary stories. And as you know, my mission is to help 1 million veterans and business owners achieve the dreams, goals and aspirations they deserve. And one way I do this is by speaking to people like Chalky. Hello, Chalky. How are you doing?
I'm very good, John. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for asking. I'm glad you're good. Right, so you know the score. We dive straight in. There's no big introduction because we're going to learn your fantastic story as we go along on a slow reveal. So let's dive straight in at when you were a young lad. Tell me what was going on in your life, where you hail from, because you have an accent which places you in a particular place in the country. So where were you?
Well, I was in a town called Paisley. I grew up in Paisley, which for those that don't know the area, is just west of Glasgow. There's actually no greenery between Glasgow and Paisley. I grew up in a council estate, and like a lot of people, I didn't realise I was poor. And it's not until you start interacting with people who've got money that you think, oh, we don't actually have money. I didn't have a car. My dad had a car for a little bit, but he was a lorry driver, so I don't think he wanted to particularly drive the rest of the time. And it was a good enough, nothing outstanding about my actual upbringing as far as I remember. I suppose there were some difficulties in that we ended up living with my mum's parents for a while. At the time, we were led to believe that was because my mum's dad was bedridden, which he was, and that my gran couldn't look after him properly. So for just almost 10 years, my parents actually slept on one of these Z beds, you know, the couches that you pull the bed out of.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
So every night after everybody else had gone to bed, they would pull that out and go to sleep. And then my dad would get up the next morning and he would leave sometimes 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We rarely saw him in the morning, Monday to Saturday. And there you go. So nothing particularly exceptional about it. I wouldn't say that many people round about me consider themselves exceptional. I don't really consider myself exceptional. That's it.
I know that during our chats, there was something that made me chuckle a little bit when you gave a comparison to Rabsy Nesbitt, which was a fictional character in the Glasgow region area. And what was the relationship between Rabsy Nesbitt and where you lived?
Well, Rabsy Nesbitt, a lot of people don't realise, has actually got a bit of a poshed up accent compared to what we were really like. So when I joined the Air Force, part of the role was radio operator. And the Irish and the Scots could understand me, but nobody else could. So this accent that I've got now is 40 plus years of slowing down so that the English and others around the world could actually understand me. Because I guarantee it, even though you were born in Glasgow, Joe, you would not have been able to understand me back in 1978 when I joined up.
No, there are some interesting accents around that neck of the woods. And that's interesting because I know that my accent isn't from my hometown. It was developed, certainly not from Glasgow, but from Widnes in between Liverpool and Manchester, because I had to develop it for radio purposes, because people have to understand what you're saying when you're calling in something on the radio. So yeah, that's interesting. So you grew a fond relationship with reading, didn't you, at an early age?
Yeah. I still read. Nowadays, I read both hardback books or softback books and Kindle. I'm one of the very few people that I seem to speak to who's a hybrid. It seems there's a lot of people who say, oh, Kindle's great, and others say, oh, no, you've got to hold it. And it's like, well, I read. But my early reading involved things like Biggles and other sort of mainly kind of a World War II characters, but a little bit more. And that was what really developed my interest in flying. And I know that you and I have spoke about visualization and the power of visualization to actually change your life. And I actually reflected on this a number of years after I'd left the Air Force, when I became more aware of the true power of visualization. all through my growing life, I visualized being able to fly, but in hindsight, I didn't actually visualize myself in the pilot seat.
Okay.
And therefore, I flew in the Air Force, but I was back in crew. I was never a pilot. And I do think there is something to that. I know a lot of people won't believe it, but really, you and I know that it's not what other people think, it's what you believe yourself that's far more
Yeah.
important. So I believe there is something in it.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because thinking about something and then believing it is a massive shift, isn't it? Because once you start believing it, it can become a reality. So what was it that happened in your life that prompted you to want to join the military, the Air Force?
Well, I'd always had it in my mind, really. But then, surprise, surprise, at the age of 17, I had a little bit of conflict with my dad.
As you do.
Yeah. And then one day in November '77, I just, instead of going into school, I got on the train. It's only 12 minutes from Paisley up to Glasgow, and then it's only about a 5-minute walk from there to the Careers Information Office, as it was in Queen Street then. I don't know if it's still there. And I walked in and said I want to join. And it was really after a bit of conflict, but it wasn't like an instant I hate you, dad type thing, because I never really did. I never hated my dad at all. I never hated anybody in my life, as far as I'm aware. But that just took me in, and I don't believe in coincidence. I think things happen because you're prepared for them. You prepare them subconsciously. You create them, whichever way you like to put it. When I walked in there, after just a few minutes, this careers information sergeant, I think he was, said to me, "Have you ever thought about aircrew?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I have actually. I'd love to do it, to be aircrew." He says, "Hang on a minute, I'm just going to check something." Now, every couple of months, they had an interview that was aimed at officer and aircrew, because most aircrew were officers. Certainly, the fast jets that everybody talks about were all officers. And he came back down and said, "Just come with me," and went in. And I went into this, which was basically a selection process, the beginning of the process for aircrew. And that was it, really. I signed up. And in hindsight, by the way, I was actually quite cruel to my mum, because I was our firstborn son. My brother was 2, just a few weeks before his 3rd birthday, so he was a very late baby. And I was 18 by the time I actually got in. And I remember coming back from, I was working part-time in a supermarket, came back about 9 o'clock, and my mum met me in the door saying, "William, there's a letter here for you from the government." And of course, William is my proper name is William, but in Scotland, in the west of Scotland, it's William. And those too young wouldn't know that there used to be brown envelopes with windows that had on the outside OHMS.
That's right, I remember that.
On Her Majesty's service, and that was mail that came from any aspect of the government. And I said to Mum, "Yeah, that'll be from the Air Force." And this was in early January. Less than 3 months later, I'd gone. So I'd left home, and I don't think my mum was actually prepared for it. So in hindsight, it was a little bit unthinking, very, very selfish at the time. By the way, I actually think selfish is a good thing. It's just the modern interpretation has added the word "at the expense of others." And I believe that if you don't look after yourself first, then you can't look after others. So being selfish is good, but that was being selfish in an inconsiderate manner. It wasn't, certainly didn't think about my mum.
Right, and I suppose, yes, especially being having a flying career, you understand that put your own oxygen mask on first, which I've said before, and I'll say again, because then once you've done that, you can help others, can't you?
You certainly can, yeah.
So within a matter of months, you're turning up at the training regiment. And where did you go, and what was it like, and what was going through your mind?
Back in those days, all non-officers started at RAF Swinderby, which I think is in Lincolnshire. It's either Lincolnshire, it's on the border there anyway. And I turned up on the 4th to get my warrant so that I could get the train down. Jumped on the train, met another few blokes who were on the way there, and arrived at, I don't think it was actually Swinderby station. There was another station close to it, and jumps out and get barked at, which I was kind of expecting, you know, because by this corporal, to get on the bus, and you get on the bus. And I'd been told that Swinderby was going to be the worst 6 weeks of your RAF career and just get through it. So I was kind of prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was that Swinderby was actually quite easy. I mean, I made a mistake. I slept in for something, so I got charged, got 3 days guardhouse duties. Like, yeah, that was fine. And got through all the fitness things and everything else, and learned the RAF law. Well, not all of it, but learned the basis of it, and everything really that you can cram into 6 weeks. As an aside, I'd never been to a football match in England, and Notts Forest had just won the league. By the way, I'm not a Notts Forest fan, but Notts Forest had just won the league with about 6 or 8 weeks to spare. So myself and a mate actually on a weekend went off to see that. So it was a great experience, really, really good experience. The trouble was that when I get posted to RAF Finningley, where the trade training for air electronic operators and air engineers, and the beginning for air loadmasters, as well as for navigators, the officers that were becoming navigators, that was worse than Swinderby, and it absolutely terrified me.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I turned up expecting it to be really nice after this horrible 6 weeks of Swinderby that wasn't horrible at all. And I then spent 6 weeks Airman Aircrew initial training course, and it was horrible. It started off with Flight Sergeant Hoth, who never pronounced these H. Oaf. His name was, my name is Oaf. Flight Sergeant Oaf. You can call me Flight. You are an aircrew cadet. In the RAF, there is no such rank as an aircrew cadet. Therefore, you are a nothing. Remember, I'm thinking, what is going on? I was completely unprepared for that job. Despite the fact I was 18 and seen various programs, I just wasn't prepared. And actually, that 6 week course, I failed it, and I got recoursed, as we say in the Air Force in those days. And it's interesting that I was shown the photograph at the beginning of both courses, and the one that I failed, there was just this look of terror in my face. I was absolutely wide-eyed, thinking. And then at the next one, the beginning of the course, it was exactly the opposite. There was just this look of steely determination, which I didn't even know was in me at that time.
And that's interesting. So, because how have you come to develop the ability to deal with failure? Because we've talked about the fact that you haven't failed until you give up. A failure is a lesson and learning. How do you deal with it? What special strategy have you got?
I don't have a special strategy. I'm a great believer that it's not. People call it failure, and to an extent, I failed that course, which is why I chose the word deliberately, because other people look upon that. I was given a second chance. Now, if I hadn't been given a second chance, then I would have gone off and done something else. You just carry on, in my view. Whatever happens to you, you put one foot in front of the other, and you just keep stepping. So there's no real special strategy, I suppose. It just makes sense to me that failure, for want of a better expression, is part of life, it's part of business, it's part of education, it's part of relationships, it's part of everything that we do. And if you can't cope with setbacks, you're in for a really, really rough life.
Yeah, because I haven't seen a perfect day yet where everything just goes bang on and it's right. And I think that society now has become, well, coaches who are clever and mentors who are clever recognize that sometimes people aren't ready. So instead of failing, it just means not ready yet.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I like that.
Yeah. So fabulous. Well, so what happened then? Because there was a particular day which happens to be my birthday, as it happens, when you received something after your training.
Are you talking the 20th of July?
Yeah, I am.
All right, I didn't know that was your birthday, Joe. That.
Yeah.
I'll need to take a note of that.
Thank you very much.
I won't do it just now, but I'll rewatch this just to find that out, if no other reason.
Okay,
Yeah,
cheers.
the 20th of July, 1979, having joined up in April 78, then the 20th of July, 79, I received my, it's called a brevy. It's like a wing. So rather than the pilots are the only people who get 2 wings, every other aircrew trade gets 1 wing. And we sometimes refer to a half a wing, which is not really correct. And it's got AE in the middle of it, and it was Air Vice Marshal Sir Keith Williamson who presented that to me. And he presented it to everybody else in the course, of course, as you would expect, as well as the navigators, the air engineers that were training it as well. Because Number 6 Flying Training School, as it was called in those days at RAF Finningley, trained navigators, air engineers, and air electronic operators, and that. And the ground crew, we didn't really get to know them because we were students and we were kind of kept away from the rest of the base, which was a bit of a shame. And it wasn't until I got on my squadron that I had proper interaction with the ground crew, which obviously was a much better environment. But there you go. So, but that was the training. That was the trade training, just learning how to operate electronic equipment. And then after that, got posted to RAF St Morgan in Cornwall. So joined the Air Force to see the world, and I'm getting away from Scotland even more now. You know, went to Lincolnshire, back to Yorkshire. Oh, that's a bit closer. Then down to Cornwall. So I'm getting to see the world a bit more. And then after that, I then went to join the squadron, 201 Squadron, RAF Kinloss, further north than where I'm from. This wasn't part of the plan. I joined the Air Force to get away from here.
So that was like a boomerang with a particularly strong piece of elastic on it.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And what was going on in your personal life at that time as well?
All right. Well, I got married very young. At the end of the trade training, as we called it, in July '79. I then went home and got married. And my new wife, Susan, and I, we travelled from the reception a couple of days, and then drove down with my dad to Cornwall. Almost 20 hours, I think it took us from Paisley to get there. Unloaded everything in the middle of the night, and then my dad just went off home. And being a lorry driver, he just got up, went out, and when we woke up about 7 o'clock, he was gone. And of course, no mobile phones in those days, so we couldn't see where he was. And it wasn't until much later that we got the phone call telling us that he would arrived home nice and safe, which was good. But RAF St Morgan was a really good base, but the accommodation for married people wasn't necessarily as good. There was a few houses quite close to it, but there was another one called RAF St Eval, EVAL, and of course that would get nicknamed St Evo by everybody in the military, the way it would do, because it was just married quarters, a naffy, and a bowling alley. That was it. I mean, a bar and a bowling alley, four-lane bowling alley. And my then very young wife was left to her own devices amongst these people as I'm off to work. So it was a really challenging time for her. We spent 10 months there before going up to RAF Kinloss, and obviously that was a bit better for her because she was only about 3 hours away. She couldn't drive. I couldn't drive. I got myself a motorbike to get from St Eval to St Morgan, but it was a little 100cc thing, so it wasn't really suitable for doing much more than that. And I didn't have a full license then, so I couldn't even take her in the back to go places. It wasn't particularly good for her, especially.
Yeah, and I think that quite often that element of military life is overlooked or not appreciated even. So that would have been tough. So you went to RAF Kinloss, and then you started to get the opportunity to do what you wanted to do, which was see a bit of the world, didn't you?
Yeah, in fact, in the training, I managed to from RAF Finningley, we did a particular flight which took us to land in Norway, and then we went from Norway into Berlin, spent a few nights in Berlin, and then came back via Norway. But we never spent any time in Norway. It was just to learn some different techniques that we had to learn in the air, dealing with what's called the oceanic operators, as it was in those days. And then also we got to Cyprus for, I think it must have been about a week with the conversion unit from St. Moggan. We were down there. And so the flying, that was different, being away from base. So it started there, and then at RAF Kinloss, we started to get to the little detachment. Sometimes, like Keflavik in Iceland, I got to Keflavik 7 times. I never got off the base. There was opportunity to go off the base, but in my early 20s, it was always one of those things, I could do that in the future type thing, the way you do when you're young.
Yeah.
Same with Norway. Went to Norway a couple of times. North Norway, got to see the midnight sun, which was an incredible experience, despite obviously being drunk like aircrew would be at that time of night. But it was a weird experience being drunk and thinking that sun hasn't gone down, and then slowly realizing the way it does. So a few places. But I was only in 201 Squadron from July 80 till November 81. And I then got transferred to 206 because they were going to be converting to the Mark II, which was good. And I remember listening to Andy Fryer, one of your previous guests.
That's right, yeah.
And he was talking about how he was in the Mark I and went down to Ascension not long after the Falklands had been invaded by the Argentinians, and then he was relieved by the Mark II as well. I was one of the Mark II crews that went down there, but we didn't spend a lot of time there. Even the Mark II crews, we were rotated quite, I think probably every 2 or 3 weeks. I don't remember being there for any length of time. But the conversion to the Mark II was good. We spent a couple of weeks at RAF Woodford, which a lot of people in the area where I now live, Cheshire, will know. It's over southeast of Manchester.
That's right. I know what it is, yeah.
Yeah. And the base is gone now, unfortunately, and there's the front end of a Nimrod still there. But there's Avro, I've got a heritage museum if anybody ever wants to go in and see the Nimrod, which it was the Nimrod. I'm not sure if I'd mentioned that until now. It was the Nimrod that I spent the next 6 years flying in. And it was a very, very enjoyable time in the flying sense. It wasn't all enjoyable, though, less so on the ground, shall we say.
And I mean, the Nimrod was a feared piece of flying equipment, really, because what it got up to and what it could do.
I think it was more feared by the submarines than anything, because they knew that we could track them without them knowing that we were tracking them. And it would have to be an incredible coincidence. They would literally have to drive into, I don't know what the correct expression is for a submerged submarine under the water.
Don't ask me, mate. I'm Army. I'm Army. So.
I suppose sail is the right expression, but sail doesn't sound right if it's under the water. So we'd have to actually directly hit one of the sonar buoys that we dropped in. So the chances of that happening were fairly slim. And they would know if they'd hit it. So we would listen to them and they wouldn't know we were there, and that was the whole point of it. Especially the nuclear submarines, which were the ones that could stay on task for long time without surfacing. The diesel electrics, in those days, the batteries didn't last particularly long. I don't know what they're like now, because I haven't really kept up to date with it, to be honest.
And there's not much need for it now, really, is there, in our lives anyway. Certainly, if you're still in, of course, it matters a great deal. So I know you did a lot of operationally sensitive tours and flights. What was a big challenge that you could share with us that you particularly had when flying in the Nimrod and doing your stuff, the magical stuff?
Well, I'm not sure there was any any challenges when we were flying. I mean, I remember that the Soviets then had an aircraft called a Bear, which was it had 8 propellers, 4 engines with twin counter-rotating, and that propeller aircraft was faster than the Nimrod, considering we were a jet. Yeah, they could out-accelerate us, and it was a fantastic aircraft. But we used to see them and wave at them, and occasionally, and they would wave at us, and we waved with a full hand. It wasn't any like 1 or 2 fingers or any of those you hear about. It was sort of just acknowledgement of people doing their job more than anything.
Yeah.
in that. I mean, the Falklands was not a challenging operation for us. I'm not. I don't want to belittle the challenges of those on the ground. We flew from Ascension Island. Normally we would fly 8 hours, or very rarely we would fly more than that. But during the conflict, the Mark IIs had been fitted with in-flight refueling. And we used to fly for 15, 16 hours. So we'd fly down, making sure we'd refueled on the way down, operate in the area. I've been told, I don't know whether it's true or not, but I've been told that the Nimrod got closer to the Argentinian coast than any other aircraft.
Right.
That would not surprise me, but I don't, sorry, any other British aircraft. It wouldn't surprise me, but we weren't particularly concerned about their aircraft because we actually did some air-to-air combat training with a Phantom. And the Phantom wasn't allowed to use its radar because the Argentinian aircraft didn't have missile-guided or radar-guided missiles.
Right.
So therefore, they only had the sidewinders, which are heat-seeking. And in theory, fortunately, I had to put it into practice, we could outturn them because we could go really, really low and slow. And you probably don't know, and most people won't know that fighter pilots do not really like flying at low level. They like to be up high. And I understand why. I'm not saying that our pilots loved flying at low level, but when you've got an aircraft that's got over 100-foot wingspan and you're flying down to 200 feet, then that kind of concentrates the mind, I would imagine, of our pilots. But they would do it. And it was fantastic experience, of course. But the trouble was, if the Argentinians had ever sent anybody out to us, do you really want to put it to test? Do you want to think that we're in a multi-role combat airliner, as it became nicknamed, because we had anti-submarine weapons, we had anti-shipping weapons, we had anti-aircraft missiles on board now. So, I mean, it really was multi-role combat. And then I was fortunate after the conflict, about 18 months after it, to actually spend 3 weeks down in Stanley, or at the old runway, as it was still covered with the metal sheeting. And I was really looking forward to it because I've been told, you might have heard this one, that there's a woman behind every tree in the Falklands. I was like, oh, this is going to be great.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a tree yet. It's the size of Wales, by the way. The landmass is huge. People think it's these tiny little island. It's a big, big place. But it was a fantastic experience. But the only challenges I had was with on the ground. There's a couple of officers who, in my view, one of them behaved wrongly. But of course, in those days, I was a sergeant. There was no way for me to know if there was anything that could be done about this. I was renting a place with a couple of mates. I then moved out to go and rent with a couple of mates. And unknown to me, these two blokes I'd left behind had stopped paying. And the landlord was a squadron leader who had a word with my boss, and I was marched in to be told I had to pay rent of a place that I no longer lived. And I thought, this is a very, very strange thing. But it's one of those ones where you think something, but you know that you shouldn't say it out loud. So I did. I didn't say it out loud. I just thought something and went off, and I paid for it, and then exacted my revenge, not in a physical sense, with the two so-called friends, and I got the money out of them eventually. But the one that finally made me realize that the RAF wasn't for me, because the flying was great, but everything surrounding that, and the majority of time in the Air Force, you don't fly, you're on the ground. Then I got marched in again. It was one of those ones. I'm in the crew room, and my boss shouts, "White, my office, and bring your hat." And we all know that if you're told to bring your hat, then it's one of those weird military things. You put your hat on, you go into the officer, you salute, to then be told that I couldn't do something in my spare time that was legal, ethical, moral. I couldn't do it. And then I had to salute him on the way out. And as I saluted him on the way out, these were not the words, but I said, "I'm leaving." I didn't want my whole life. I mean, it would have meant everything in my life would have been controlled, and I wasn't prepared to accept that, which I understand a lot of people do. Most of my mates stayed into age 55, by the way. Well, almost all of them did. They stayed into age 55. And fantastic, and it was great for them. I had no ties by this stage. Unfortunately, my first wife and I, we'd split up, and had been divorced by this stage, and there was nothing to really need the so-called security of the service. And interestingly, within about 10 years, there was a lot of people had been made redundant from the RAF after all the various reviews that happened.
Yeah, well, I remember the Strategic Defence Review.
Yeah.
And just before that, funnily enough, so I didn't get my bounty or the payoff, the redundancy pay, but I came to the same conclusion as you, that I've developed this ability. And by the way, if you're long-term serving 22 years, that's great. For me, I just developed the ability to think, what else is there?
Yeah, and that is a great way of putting it. What else is there? Because I actually already decided there were other things that I wanted to do. It was actually a part-time business that I was doing, and I'm aware nowadays, by the way, that they can't behave the way that officer did in telling you controlling everything you can in your spare life. I'm aware that that's all changed, which is obviously only for the good. But there you go. That was in '83, in May '83. And the strange thing about it was part of the reason that encouraged me to leave was that I'd actually been selling some products, and I was making more money part-time selling these products, and the Air Force were paying me as aircrew.
That's fabulous.
Well, that was only in 5 months, and I'd never been taught any sales. I'd never learned any sales techniques. I just did what the guy that I was working with told me, and it worked. It's amazing what happens. So often you do something that you're told and it works, and then you question it and it doesn't.
Which is probably one of the reasons why guys, because we're going to talk about transferable skills a bit later. It's probably why one of the reasons why ex-military do well in jobs where the systems, whether it be sales systems or communication systems, something that it can follow and is clearly defined, is pretty much well suited to ex-military. So what was it you moved into? You unfortunately the relationship had ended, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, because now I know you're happy. So I suppose in one way it was fortunate. So your manager's ended, you've got no ties. The military's not making as much money for you as a part-time job is. You get out, and what was the transition like?
The transition was tough because obviously I'd stopped at the part-time. It wasn't a job in the normal sense. I wasn't paid as an employee, because I reckon I would have probably had to get permission for that. But it was just a business. It was self-employed, commission-only type thing.
Yeah.
So I thought, I really like this. I'll go into commission-only selling insurance. Or it was called life and pensions in those days before regulation.
Yeah.
And the complete lack of structure was, in hindsight, the biggest problem for me. I didn't realize that there was a lack of structure. I just thought that I was doing things right, but I wasn't. I wasn't focused. I didn't know how to structure my day. I had no daily method of organization of operation, which obviously the military have for you, whether you like it or not. So that lack of structure led to a situation where I once went without food for 4 days because I really miscalculated, and the check that I was expecting, which was a fairly chunky check, was delayed. Now, whether it was delayed in the post or whatever, doesn't matter. I just had no money. So I thought, oh, well, it's coming through. It's coming through. Right. And then realized I had no food. And then when it came through, in those days, it took 3 days to clear.
Right. Yeah. Of course it did.
Yeah, you think the kids nowadays, well, not just the kids, but the people who have got bank accounts over the past 10, 15 years for the first time, instant transactions just did not happen. I mean, you could get it cleared in a day if you paid quite a bit of money, but
I mean, even with a check now, if you use your app on your phone, you take a photograph and the money's in the bank.
That's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
Same day. But you had a clearing house, which I learned all about because, similar to you, when I got out, and I still am today, became a financial advisor in 1988. No structure,
Yeah.
Very little structure and before really any regulation came in. So yeah, I totally appreciate where you're coming from.
What was worse though was that eventually, due to my complete incompetence and lack of understanding of how to run my own life, my house was repossessed.
Mm.
Now, I'd actually moved out of it and was living and working in Edinburgh, but because of decisions that I took, then I lost that house. Big lesson there, by the way, Joe, but huge lesson there.
Yeah.
But it was down to me. It wasn't down to anybody else. It was entirely down to me.
And that's interesting because when I observe people's reaction to when bad stuff happens, oh, it was because of that, it was him or it was her, or the sun wasn't shining on that day, or it was a bit rainy, or whatever. And it's interesting that you share my view. It's about taking responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's partially because of the business that started back in January '83. Then part of that introduced me. One of the guys I was working with, a guy called Jim Sinclair, he introduced me to personal development. And the first book he actually gave me a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Ah, brilliant book.
Which is a brilliant skills book. I mean, and it does teach you lots of stuff about interacting and listening and communication at an even better level than the military on its own did, which was very, very good. But it then meant that I began to read other people like Dennis Waitley, Jim Rohn, and other sort of people that in the day were giants of the personal development profession, movement, whatever you like to call it. And I think because of that, when I left Air Force, even though I didn't have the skills, I had the mindset that this is down to me. So I knew it was down to me. But anyway, losing the house actually cut off my ties to the people around RAF Kinloss, because that was the first house that I bought, and I bought it when I was still in the Air Force. And I used to commute from it to and from the squadron, of course. But it then meant I'm living in Edinburgh. And that's how I met my wife when I was living and working in Edinburgh. And that was in '88 that I met Alison, and we've been together. She's currently down in Kent at a shop that we bought in Kent, because for another I'll give you a very potted version. She loves the hardware industry, as in nails and hammers and things like that, not as in computer hardware. So therefore, she's looking to save community hardware shops if possible, but they must have a certain level of turnover staff in it, and that's where she is just now. She's down at the shop in Kent, goes down every couple of months, and we'll be enjoying a few days in Kent while it's raining up here in Cheshire.
And that's great. And I used to live in Kent for many years after leaving the military, so I know Kent well. And it does get a little bit warmer and sunnier down that neck of the woods, certainly. So, talking about leadership skills, because I know you led a great team in a particular encyclopedia business.
All right.
And how did you find the autocratic versus democratic leadership style differed, and what were the results that you got from using either or both?
Well, I was very fortunate that part of that Airman Aircrew initial training course, we were taught leadership, introduced to it, by the way. I shouldn't say taught it, because obviously it's an enormous subject. But I remember they showed us a film, which was a World War II person coming in, an American coming in, and it demonstrated his different styles. And I'd never heard of the word autocratic until then. So the Air Force expanded my language in lots of other ways as well. But so I understood the democratic and autocratic, and my autocratic style was the easiest one, of course, and it's dead easy to tell people. But when I was actually with Encyclopedia Britannica, which was another commission only, by the way, this was a year and a half or so, maybe almost 2 years after I moved to Edinburgh. Then I started to do it part-time and realized within a couple of weeks that I could make a lot more doing Encyclopedia Britannica than the other business that I actually started, which wasn't doing as well. Again, I'd gone into that business without proper research. Lots of things, again, my responsibility. And in a very short period of time, within 3 months, the local manager had promoted me to what they called field trainer, which is where I'd take out some new reps and show them it, and I'd get a little bit extra for doing that. And then he offered me the chance to become the district manager of Aberdeen, which I took. And it was a mixture of autocratic and democratic, because I had a couple of employees, and I was probably more democratic with them than I was with the ones who needed the democratic style, which was the commission-only reps in my team. And more often than not, the commission-only reps, I was too harsh on them because I didn't understand the honey concept. It'll attract more than obviously just tell them what to do. So although I'd been told it, I didn't understand it, and you don't understand until you're actually doing it. And then I came back to manage the district in Edinburgh, one of the districts in Edinburgh, which was a bit bigger than the one in Aberdeen. And then an opportunity came up from the MD, who was based down in South London, to take on the West of Scotland division, which was actually the bigger of the divisions in Scotland. So it might have put my boss's nose out a bit at the time. If it did, he was very, very good about it. He never, ever was anything other than gracious, which was tremendous. And I did that, and obviously I was getting an override. But one of the things about selling encyclopedias, or selling to the public in general, if you're selling to consumer, is that generally you have to do it in the evening and weekends. And of course, being the manager, there's a lot of stuff that I had to do as well, with a district manager, division manager, during the day. So I was in the office between 7 and past most days, Monday to Saturday. And then in the evenings, I was out selling. And in the weekends, I was out selling. So how Alice and I managed to get through that period in our lives, I don't know. She was working full-time in a very, very successful department store in Edinburgh at the time called Jenner's, which unfortunately, since the family sold it, is gone. And Alison's left long before it went, by the way. And managing the division was an eye-opener as well, especially as I was known to have certain political views, but I never brought them into my work. And there were a couple of people in the West of Scotland office who had opposing political views, shall we say. And they were wanting to make a big thing of it. And that tested my management and leadership skills, shall we say. I'm not sure that they would agree with the way it went forward, but everybody else seemed to agree with the way it went forward. So there we go.
Well, you go with the flow, and the majority rules, really, in that respect.
It didn't get like that. I mean, it was really an autocratic position. I mean, I was in charge. It was up to me to hire and fire. Okay. I chose to. So it wasn't particularly democratic. It was more. It was wider than democratic in that you just. I talked with people. I listened to them. I wasn't as good listening then as I am now. Some would say that I'm still not very good at listening, but hey, that's probably my wife. I don't know, all our wives are like that, aren't they? So, but anyway, it was a huge learning experience. And in October '93, after I'd been with Encyclopedia Britannica for about 3 years, I went on holiday. I was 33 then, and I went on holiday with my wife and 3 other friends to Florida, and realised the job was actually killing me. It took me about 5 days to wind down. I was so engrossed, and every morning I had to do this, and I had to collect all these figures, and I was wound up. My body was so tense, and so when I came back, I decided that I was going to leave that. And coincidentally, that time Alison had actually was looking at a job, which ended up just a few months later. We moved to England because of Alison's job, and I ended up getting an office job, Monday to Friday. I wanted it 9 to 5. I had to start at 8:30 instead of 9. I'll put up with that. But that, yeah.
And I remember that time specifically in history, 1993, because by that time I was an independent financial advisor, and I've been a financial advisor for 5 years. And I don't know if you remember, but mortgage interest rates, the Bank of England base rate was 15%.
Yeah.
The Woolwich Building Society was charging me 17% on my mortgage.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And because no one was investing at that time, because of the '87 crash and people were still scared of equity investments, the only way I could make my living was recommending protection policies like mortgage protection and mortgages. And people were tying into 5-year deals at 9.95%. Can you believe that?
Well, nowadays, can you believe that? No, of course, because we think it's extortionate just now.
Yeah,
And it's
I
not
know.
compared to those days. But
Yeah. So yeah, and yeah, it's always interesting. And at that time, I decided that was when I made a big decision as well. We won't go into that now. That's for another day, because I'm looking at what you've done, which is remarkable. At that time, then, what was going on, and what did success look like to you, if at all you had the picture of it?
I've never actually had a picture of success as an individual. It's not been anything to me, any particular achievements. I've not been as goal driven as other people. I understand that goals are hugely important to some people, enormously important. And I understand that we all actually have goals, even if it's the basic level is if I'm going to get in my car and go and pick up some milk, that's a goal at the base level. So, but I've not been goal focused in business the way that other people have. At that time, the job that I had was a really enjoyable job where I'd taken on an internal sales role. And then because I was the only person using any of my computers, I ended up morphing into looking after computers for a small company, 46 staff. What was going on in my private life outside of work was more interesting, certainly for me, because I got involved in the community. We'd moved to Middlewich. In '96, we moved to Middlewich. We're still in the same house now as we bought back then, and
we're good friends, and it's a lovely place. Yeah, it's a lovely community.
Yeah, and we're less rural than you are, of course, because you're proper rural in rural Cheshire. But there you go. But by getting involved in the community at '99, my wife and I both got elected to Middlewich Town Council. Now, in Scotland, they don't understand parish councils because they don't exist. But they do have their own spending. They do take a council tax from the local community. And when we got on the council, the budget was £67,000 for the whole town. So there wasn't exactly a lot that we could do with £67,000. However, it became some of the most rewarding 12 years of my life, that the things that I did with regard. I was at a council for 12 years. And I had some really fascinating things develop, some of which sound less interesting than they actually were. I ended up chairing a working group that we created for the Canal Development Corridor.
Well, actually, though, people, I know you put a chuckle in with that and a smile. The fact is, round where we are, the canal infrastructure is very important, because they used to take coal down around the country. Well, they used to textiles, everything. That was an important method of transport back in the days.
Indeed, in Middlewich, most people don't know that there's Middlewich, Nantwich, and Northwich. And there's also a little place called Leftwich, and the witch part of that relates to salt, the production of salt.
That's right.
It's an ancient name. So Middlewich was in the centre of the salt production, going back to pre-Roman, but the Romans really ramped it up as well. So I mean, it's all sorts of history. But actually, it turned out that I was the best person to chair that Canal Development Corridor group, because the boaters, the fishers, the walkers, the cyclists, they all had competing interests, and I was none of them. I had no particular interest in the canals, other than these are pretty parts of Middlewich, and they are. And there's 3 canals in Middlewich, including apparently the shortest canal at 57 metres in Britain. But there's a long story behind that I won't bore you with. But I also chaired the cemetery board. Dead interesting that, yeah, I know. It was a fascinating, different variety of things. And because of being a councillor, I then got my next job, because I'd been made redundant from the office furniture company when I was doing the IT stuff. And that was working with parish councils across the whole of Cheshire. And then eventually I got seconded one day a week to work for the National Association of Local Councils. And local councils in government speak of parish councils. Principal authorities, I use district council and all that sort of stuff, you know. So this was the very first tier, the closest to government, and it was really, really good. And the job that I had was fantastic until we'd actually started something, my wife and I, which was a network marketing business that we started because both of us had been made redundant within 18 months. And we were looking for some security.
Now, by the way, you see, and it's typical of the guys that come on this podcast. We skate over stuff and like it's nothing really. And you both made redundant at pretty much the same time.
Yeah.
So the stuff hit the fan, right? You were living what could be classed as, well, if it wasn't perfect, it's a pretty nice life, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and you both made redundant. What's going on in your mind then?
It was how when I get made redundant, I knew it was happening, and Alison been made redundant 18 months before me, and we did know that was happening. That was a real shock, and her career had been real on the go. We the hospitality that she used to get, helicoptered into the British Grand Prix as soon as they found out that she was into Formula One. She'd get all sorts of things. She gets so much, and it was tremendous. And out from the outside, it looked tremendous, and it was. Don't get me wrong, it was really good. But when she get made redundant, that was a huge shock to her. And we've spoke about this much more recently. It was a bit like grief. For a couple of years, it took her a long time to get over that. But neither of us were out of work for long. There's work out there if you want it. I'm a firm believer that I've delivered Chinese meals. I've worked behind a bar. I'm not saying anything against people who work behind a bar because they provide a brilliant service. I'll do anything if it means that I need to do it. And delivering Chinese is no structure. Working behind a bar is a bit of banter. It's a bit of fun. So I'll do anything just to make sure that I'm not got nothing coming in. So I'm firmly of the opinion that you will find something if you want it. But there are people who are incapable of working, and I'm not talking about them. Okay, I'm talking about the people who don't have the desire to work. If they want it, they can find it. So it was just how do we move forward? And it was always how do we move forward? How do we move forward? How do we move forward? And Alison's been the same. Even though she did go into a little bit of a downer, it certainly wasn't depression. It wasn't as bad as people that we know who've been depressed. But it was challenging. One foot in front of the other. Just keep going. Just keep going. And at that time as well, was it 2005? Yeah, not long after I get made redundant, Alison became mayor of Middlewich. And she's she's very competitive, by the way. So she had to do it before me. 2 years later, I was mayor of Middlewich. So we've both been honoured by being mayor of the town that we still live in. And some people remember that. I'm not saying they all remember it fondly, by the way, but some people remember the time when we were mayor. And it's a really weird dynamic because you're wearing the big red robe and the chain, and people applaud when you come on. Now, I'd never had that before. I think people only applaud to see the back of you. Thank you very much.
Well, I remember when I was president of Tarpley Rotary Club, and on the carnival day, you get to stand on the hotel steps, the Swan, and as the parade goes by, and I'm thinking, I'm just Joe. So I get where you're coming from, yeah.
Because of the voluntary work, though, we actually ended up down at the garden party at Buckingham Palace. Nothing to do with the jobs, but we got to. That was an amazing experience, of course. I mean, the people don't realise this garden party's got like 8,000 other people there. But the memories that you make in your voluntary side are incredible. And it was while I was still a town councillor that I also got involved in the Freemasons, and the Freemasons become very important to me as well. So there's all these things that I like doing. And to me, there is no such thing as work-life balance. There are priorities. Sometimes you have to prioritize work. And that's what I did with Encyclopedia Britannica for a while. Other times, like when Alison's dad was ill and our mother had died, unfortunately, 3.5 years before he died, he was on his own in Edinburgh, and Alison upped sticks effectively and went up there and looked after him. Work became secondary. It was the importance of work is less. So work-life balance is a fallacy. However, if people believe that to get them through the day, that's fine. The same way if people have religious beliefs to get them through the day, that's fine. If people have other beliefs to get them through the day, that's fine. I'm not going to judge other people by what they do, even if it's not me.
Yeah.
But I expect the same sort of in return, and that doesn't always happen, shall we say?
No. And so you've been made redundant, a bit of a shock. And then where'd you go then? Because I know what you do now. And it's funny that you say you're not goal driven. You may think of it as something else, but what I do say is that there's a clear drive not to be purposeless.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. You have a purpose. And I know your purpose is to do good, help others, and then also prosper yourself, which is quite all right too.
Yeah.
So what drives you now? What are you looking for? What's keeping you busy? And more importantly, how, or just as importantly, in fact, how and what impact do you think having a good coach or mentor or both has on your life?
Well, coaching and mentoring has been throughout my life, often informally, because coaching as a process, as a profession, is really only recently come out of the sport environment. It was always about sporting, and outside of that, there were coaches. They just weren't called coaches.
Yeah.
And I differentiate between coaches and mentors in the way that I work. So I am not a trained coach. I do not want to be a trained coach. I pay people to coach me. Not all the time, but I pay different coaches over the years to coach me. But I do believe mentoring is the big difference between coaching and mentoring is a coach will take you to where you want to go by helping you see things that you can't see yourself. A mentor is somebody who's achieved what you want to achieve and is prepared to help you get there. And all through my life, and it's interesting when you use the expression purpose, because I don't consider it a purpose, but I understand that if somebody was to analyze it, it looks very much like that. And I'm not going to disagree with that, by the way. Even when I was in the second year in school, I was mentoring some of the youngsters without realizing it. The Air Force, all the military, mentoring is at the heart of what the military do. Everything that they do, as soon as somebody joins your unit, whatever you call the unit, you're now responsible for mentoring them without any formal, this is you as a mentor. It's not that way. And in the network marketing business, which I'm fortunate to have been involved in for over 20 years, that allowed me to actually leave formal employment in 2010. I've done other things. I'm not trying to hide the fact that I've done other things. My wife and I have had property. We were looking to have property overseas, get rid of we've got rid of all the Liverpool properties now because of the council. But then people will know that Liverpool City Council got a reputation that goes way, way beyond Liverpool. And they're not particularly encouraging to private landlords, let's put it that way. We've got other things. And obviously I mentioned my wife is now off buying businesses. She's buying other businesses. We don't see ourselves stopping work until health tells us that we should. But I don't work 40 hours a week. I don't work 30 hours a week. Some of my team probably wish I worked more with them. But the whole point of network marketing is to actually create independent business owners. They've all got their own business. My role with somebody in my team is to help them become independent. And actually, there's one guy in my team who's overtaken me. Now, sometimes people think, well, that's a bad thing. No, it's not. It's a fantastic thing. So the guy that I didn't even know him, my wife recruited him, and he's overtaken me. He makes more money than me. He's done more. He deserves more. That's the beauty, in my view, of network marketing. So I'm creating that in my own life, and I still work. I still recruit people. I want to help people. I want to help younger people than me, because obviously I'm 64 now, and therefore I'm not looked on by people in their 20s as somebody to look up to. I'm looked at as somebody who's getting beyond it.
I'm not sure about that, mate.
They've told me.
Well, that might be someone who's pretty much unhelpful and not diplomatic. Yeah.
It was humour. I'm not, nobody's actually said you're over the hill, you old codger, like that.
Yeah,
Although
yeah.
I think we were talking earlier on, and we probably sounded a bit like grumpy old men at one point. But there we go.
It's interesting because my son said to me the other day, he says, "You look old, Dad, but you're still fit. You're still quite fit." I thought, "Oh, cheers, mate." Honesty, great. It's a great
veiled compliment, I think is the expression.
Yeah. So it's interesting you differentiated between a coach and a mentor, actually, because I use the football analogy, which you might be quite interested in because of the people I'm referring to. Alex Ferguson, or Sir Alex Ferguson, was a great coach, right? Because he wasn't a great footballer though. So when I'm looking, he could play football and he played all right, but he wasn't the greats, right? So he was a great coach, but he wouldn't be classed at world-class level as a great mentor. Kenny Dalglish, on the other hand, was a great footballer and a great coach. So he was a great mentor as well, because he actually could do it. Yeah. So I think that what you were referring to before about someone who's done it, and the coach is someone who's been able to teach you the skills, but not necessarily do them great themselves. Yeah.
To continue the football analogy, I would say one of the greatest mentors around who's still playing at the moment is James Milner, who's playing for Brighton now at the age of 37.
Yeah.
And the way that you can see the way that he speaks with the other players, especially the younger ones in the team. He's fantastic at bringing them up. He's not the only example of that, but then you mentioned Alex Ferguson and Kenny Dalglish, and you know that I'm a season ticket holder for Liverpool, of course, so you shouldn't have mentioned Alex Ferguson at all. But that's
no, I know, I know, and I was at the Cup with you, and that was an absolutely fantastic experience to be standing there when the songs, the anthems that they're singing are just unbelievable.
My wife comes, okay, we've got 2 season tickets, one in her names, and when she comes, she's almost in tears when they sing You'll Never Walk Alone.
Yeah.
And you and I know that was a friendly we were at. 59,000 people at a friendly is astonishing. By the way, it's not just the only team in England that gets that. It astonishes me that the English teams, and as a Scotsman, it kind of hurts to say this, the English teams seem to be the only ones that can generate this level of interest across the leagues, not just in the highest 2 or 3 like they seem to be in other countries, but across the leagues. They just have this incredible following. And it is very, very tribal. Most of it is in a very good way. I've never seen trouble, touch wood, hopefully I never will. But and I think the press are more interested in bigging up the trouble than actually happens at football.
But and actually, my faith, because as you know, I'm a great rugby supporter. My faith in the beautiful game, which I did dispute because of football hooligans, but on that day, it was just a family atmosphere. Children were there, and what particularly moved me is after you've got 69, 70,000 people singing "You'll Never Walk Alone," then a minute's silence in recognition for the Southport tragedy, where the three young girls lost their lives, and you could hear the pin drop, and I thought, wow, what an element of respect there.
Yeah, and that happens at football grounds up and down the country. It is astonishing, absolutely astonishing. However,
so listen, coming back on point then, what's the one tip you would give to someone? The biggest tip, whether they're coming out the military, they're out the military, they're doing great, or they're not doing so great and want to get better results. What's the one tip that you would give them?
Get into personal development, not professional development. Get into personal development as early as you can. If you stop developing yourself personally, and you can call it spiritually, you can call it whatever you like to. If you stop developing yourself, by default, you're choosing to die early. Now that may sound a little bit harsh to some people, but why would you not develop yourself more? We see the gym bunnies, or whatever you like to call them, who develop their bodies, which is fantastic. Many of them also develop their mind. yoga is an underrated study in my view. In that if you study the words of the old yoga teachers, then the exercise had nothing to do with it. It was all about developing the mind. And by developing your mind, you will be prepared for anything. Because one of the huge advantages the military have is we understand the 5 Ps or the 6 or 7 Ps to develop, depending on how rude you want to be. And proper planning prevents poor performance. Let's just leave it at that. And therefore, if you do that before you leave the military and you've developed your mind well, the chance of you having challenging times will be reduced. I'm never going to say that it will be eliminated. You cannot eliminate challenging times. Life is about challenges, and it's how we deal with them. But by developing your mind and preparing for things as well as you can, just personal development, personal development, personal development. That's what I would say.
Thank you. And what does the future hold for you and Alison now? What's it looking like?
Well, a few years ago, it was looking like we'd be leaving Britain in a couple of years to live a nomadic life. And then Alison got involved in starting buying businesses. And so that's put that on hold for a good few years. The business she's buying, by the way, they can actually be managed from anywhere in the world because of obviously modern technology. However, she's negotiating to buy other ones, and she'll keep building that. She really has a passion for the community hardware shops that give you service that sheds can't. They can't compete with it, but they don't try to. They offer a different kind of service. And therefore, until Alison has got to the point where she's got probably 6, 7 shops, perhaps even part of the supply chain, then we're not going anywhere. We're not complaining about that, though, because we have a 9-year-old dog who's currently got a cone on because I had her at the vet yesterday because of a problem with her leg. And you wouldn't know that, but she's actually sat behind me, lying on the floor.
Oh, right. Okay. Silent as anything. Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, I think she's asleep. Hopefully she's been asleep for all this time, which for a German Shepherd,
yeah,
it has been very, very quiet.
It's a feat, yeah.
But she's 9 years old, so we don't really want to go traveling without her. And therefore the idea is to get a few properties overseas, move between them and live a nomadic lifestyle, and again, until our health goes. But network marketing will continue to grow for me. My involvement in Freemasons will continue to grow, hopefully. And I really enjoy the interaction I have with that. Not only by the way of the Freemasons that I'm involved in, but I've also been fortunate to have interaction with the Lady Masons. There's 2 Lady Mason organizations in England. There's other organizations around the world, by the way. And having the interaction with them has been really good. And I remember the first time I met one of them, which was at a meeting in Leicester, going back about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Then it was absolutely refreshing that so much of the attitudes were the same in terms of the integrity, the respect, what we call service. I mean, it's just fantastic. The ladies have it the same way as the men. Whether we call it women or men, I don't particularly care. But I think they actually use women rather than ladies in the name. But it's one of these great myths that Freemasonry is only for men. I happen to be in the one that is men only. The people I've met happen to be the one that are women only. That's our choice. And I really, really enjoy what I get out of it, and also what I give to it. I will at some point have to stop my season ticket, sadly, especially if I'm living overseas. But there you go. So.
Well, and I share a great fondness for Freemasonry, I believe, and actually it's very good for military people coming out of the military, because it gives continued brotherhood and sisterhood, and it gives a sense of community and support. So that's fabulous. Well, listen, Chalky, how can people get in touch with you?
The best way is LinkedIn. There's not that many Chalky White, I would think, on LinkedIn. I've never actually bothered to do a lookup, but if you put in Chalky White, and I'm in Cheshire, it might say Middlewich, I think. I don't know whether it does or not, but it's the photograph is fairly up to date, because I do think that social media, you should have a reasonably up-to-date photograph. And through business networking, I'm connected with a really good headshot photographer. And Andrew Collier did them for me. Perhaps
All right.
nice, but there you go. He's a
Call
lot.
out for Andrew there. I know Andrew well. And yeah, you're looking as dapper as ever on your photo as well. So, Chalky, thank you very much for your service to the country. Thank you very much for your service to the community. And thank you for spending time with me today.
Well, thank you for this, Joe, because I've learned so much about you from listening to the other podcasts, and also by listening to people like Andy Fryer about so much about the other aspects of the military, and that officers like Andy are actually all right sometimes.
Well, I'm sure they'll be listening to this, and they'll probably contact you on LinkedIn so you can have a good confab. Thank you. And remember, you've enjoyed this podcast. We've enjoyed bringing it to you today. And to find out more about the resources that are available to you, visit joeteams.com. That's joeteams.com, joeteams.com, to find out how you can get help with more resources. And until we meet again, have a brilliant day. Thank you.